Can you explain what forms the deep state?
The deep state is the CIA, the Pentagon, the arms contractors, the particular armed services committee and intelligence committees in the Congress that determine what tiny congressional oversight there is over all of this. But this is a big money machine, about $1.5 trillion a year. It's again a poker game from the point of view of these people. They're so poorly trained, so immoral, so ready to squander the lives of other people, so ready to put all of our lives at risk of nuclear war. But the deep state is what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, what others have called the military-industrial cweongressional academic complex, the Mickey Mac complex, and media is in there. We're ruled by a set of agencies that are unaccountable, that operate on classified documents, though we can see what's going on, but we're not told what's going on. And they basically, when you mentioned, more billions of aid, this is basically unaccountable. When you mention Biden approving deep strikes inside Russia, what is this? First of all, is Biden even mentally competent at this point? Doubtful by most inside accounts. So somebody has gotten the president or a robo machine to sign a statement, no oversight at all by anybody, no honest explanation. We were even lied about the dates. We were told that the decision to allow these strikes came in the fall, but then a New York Times article a few days ago said, no, they were made in the spring. They just weren't told to the American people until the fall. So this is what the deep state is. It's a secretive, unaccountable, small number of institutions and individuals who control the CIA and the military operations and the ancillary sanctions regimes and other coercive policy measures exercised by the US government.
How serious do you think are Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and others in his team, Mike Waltz, Marco Rubio, and others, when they talk about peace with Russia? Because if you think they are serious, then that I suppose is a major break. Whether they can trump the deep state or not is a different question, but just as far as the political class is concerned, that would be a major break as far as American policy vis-a-vis Russia is concerned.
It would be a major policy, and it's possible, but we're not going to know for a little while because many members of these high-level team are part of the deep state for a long time, and others are critics of it. And how things evolve, I think, are unsure right now. Also, there are accidents and peculiarities. Trump's usual way of doing things is to make maximalist demands in order to bring the other side halfway. So this is a kind of, bargaining in the bazaar approach. But if he makes a maximalist demand to Russia and Russia says no, and then the American hubris gets its back up and says, yo, how dare they say no to the great American juggernaut, we could be off to the races before you know it in new rounds of escalation. So I think there's a lot of happenstance ahead. There are people who would like peace. There are some people who want peace so that they can go to war with China. It's a huge grab bag of different viewpoints right now. Generally, the bet over the long term is continuity of U.S. policy, which would mean the war continues, escalation. Orwell, of course, portrayed a world that was a perpetual war. That was his vision of the great empires always fighting proxy wars on their borders, that would be the permanent state of affairs. It's not it's not a vision to be discounted in terms of forecasts.
And when it comes to China, I don't think there are any green offshoots that might be there vis-a-vis Russia. Am I correct in assuming that?
Well, the rhetoric is all in the other way. China's the great threat. China's the pure competitor. China must be stopped. China must be contained. China wants to take over the world. Again, it's just hard to imagine how juvenile all of this is. These are grown-ups, but my God, did they get a high school education? I don't understand it. The level of the lack of specificity, the lack of nuance, the lack of shading, the certitudes, China wants to take over the world, this kind of thing. This is comic book stuff. And maybe, this is just the generation that grew up on comic books or grew up on video games. Maybe they can't think anymore. I don't know. There are many theories about how primitive all of this is, or that it's just the grandiosity of empire. But there isn't right now much a glimmer vis-a-vis China, except for one thing I would add, which is that remember the big financial backers of the incoming government, and maybe this is a fundamental point, it is the tech sector, it is the venture capital sector. They do a lot of business with China. So the question is, in the end, is it their business with the Pentagon or is their business with China, which is going to be, the determining factor? Maybe that is the right way to understand this. But if there is a glimmer of hope, it is that the tech sector says, come on, we want to make money. We don't want to have a nuclear Armageddon.
I think this is a good segue to talk a little bit about a column that you wrote about the emergence of the Global South. And we really like the politics and the spirit of your article. You said that in the 1990s, roughly about 45% of global GDP was contributed. I might be slightly wrong. I'm quoting from my memory. 45% of global GDP was held by the G7, and it was about 19% by the BRICS nation, and it has now come down to 29-35, which implies that there is an emergence. And we are a Global South channel, and the problem that we found in your article was that it doesn't take into account that a lot of that BRICS plus GDP comes from China. We had economist Professor Jayati Ghosh on our show, and she wrote an article covering Thailand, India, Vietnam, and one more in South Asia, and she showed that there is literally no convergence, if you like, be that in per capita terms or be that in pure growth, aggregate growth terms. And secondly, I think what your article misses is what you just said, is the dominance of the tech sector when it comes to the US. Which is when, if you look at the capital markets, for instance, like out of the 15 trillion equity and debt market, 65 to 70% still flows into the United States. The massive dominance of the Fortune's 500s are still almost US dominance, about 70% of those indices. So my question to you is that when we read your column, we felt that Professor Sachs is a bit naive about this emergence of the Global South. Your response to that?
Well, my point is that the technologies that will move the world economy forward are basically widely accessible by large countries or regional groups that aim to access them. I am not worried about India's potential for rapid economic development, for example. India, with its scale, its skills, its knowledge base, its digital backbone as it is right now, has every possibility of making surging economic growth in the next 25 years. If I could make one suggestion to that, it would be invest in knowledge of the population. Education is by far the most important strategic investment for any economy anywhere in the world. Make sure that young people are in school, physically or online, are learning math, are learning science, are learning other skills. And then, to my mind, this is a worldwide opportunity. It's true, right now, the United States and China dominate some of these technologies, but they don't have a lock on them. Certainly the United States does not, though its capital market is the deepest of all. China's not far behind or is ahead in many crucial technologies. I'm talking about supercomputing, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, certainly manufacturing, supply chains, 5G, and so forth. So between the US and China, I don't find that the US has a decisive choke point because NVIDIA or ASLM can produce chips that are going to make sure that the United States dominates. To my mind, this is not how the real world works. And India, I don't find with any fundamental obstacle in that regard as well. And I would say the myths about Russia being a gas station with nuclear weapons have been proven to be absurd in the Ukraine war, because not only has Russia held its own against all of the NATO weapon systems, it's proved to be an enormously innovative country in being able to design and produce its own weapon systems. And of course, not just weapon systems. And I believe that Africa, if it gets its act together, also 1.4 billion people, the same size as India and China, but 55 countries because of the imperial legacy. If it gets its act together to be unified, could have the world's fastest catching up period. I want to put every African child onto online education and a device in addition to their schooling, because the most important thing for Africa is a generation of rapid skill building, which is completely within reach right now. So no, my view is nobody owns science, nobody owns these technological knowledge, no one owns the 50,000 or 100,000 online journals in which the technologies and the science are laid out. Yes, OpenAI may be 2 years ahead or 3 years ahead or 6 months ahead or 2 months ahead on some things. There'll be new discoveries, new breakthroughs, but invest in the technologies, in the knowledge, especially in the education, and then the possibilities for pervasive convergence, I believe, are very, very real. And the beauty is, this stuff is not so expensive. It's not that the investments are completely beyond what is achievable. I like the fact that when I am in India, in the most remote rural area, the vegetable vendor has a QR code for online payments. Okay, come on. Who expected that 10 years ago or 20 years ago? This is what is absolutely possible everywhere, and it makes economic life, the potential, so much more efficient if we get organized. Last time I was in UP in a very remote rural area, a farmers cooperative was actually it was in training the first day for using drones for precision agriculture on the fields, but there were the drones there, and they were taking their first lessons in this, and that's going to tremendously boost agricultural productivity. So I'm an optimist if we don't blow ourselves up.
There is no doubt that there is a lot of technological diffusion, whether it's the payment system or whether it's mobile phones and other commodities. There is a lot of technological diffusion. I was still thinking that this technological diffusion hasn't necessarily unraveled the hierarchies in which technologies are hooked into the capital markets. We recently covered an article based on Bloomberg's, Financial Times, and others called Empire of Satellites, where we covered Elon Musk's huge attempts of using his satellites in the low Earth orbits to capture telecommunication, other satellite services, including military services. He is blackmailing others and so on. There are few alternatives to this emergence. You mentioned NVIDIA. We can talk about the emergence of the equity funds and all of that. So China definitely is an exception. It has been able to invest in its people and has developed its own capability. But the rest of the world is hooked into the global economy through the institutional dominance of the US-led system, whether it's the capital markets or IMF-led packages and so on. So that's what made us a little bit skeptical.
Well, just to say, I don't quite see it that way because what I do believe is true is that scale of investment and application of networks and being able to develop also natural language, AI and so forth, is a real phenomenon, the scale. And so countries need, or regions need scale. So China is a clear example of this. India, it has scale, believe me. It has the scale to do these things. It has a space program. It has a tremendous AI capacity. It needs to develop it. It's going to be building out a chip industry very rapidly, actually, in the next years. For ASEAN countries, I recommend an ASEAN regional integration. And in fact, if East Asia got its act together, they would really integrate China, India, at least China, Japan, Korea, ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand, the RCEP countries. I would like India to join that group also, by the way. But in any event, scale counts. That's why the African Union is so important. That's why, to my mind, ASEAN is so important. I would not want to be a small country going it alone right now. I think that is not compatible with the scale needs, whether it's in the energy sector or in the AI sector or in other digital technologies or in other supply chains. So does the US have a chokehold on these? I doubt it. It's trying, by the way. It is US foreign policy. It is US grand strategy to try to maintain a chokehold on this. I just don't believe it can do so because the US, to my count, is too small to have such a chokehold. The US nuclear weapons are a big equalizer also. The US cannot militarily defeat India. The US cannot militarily defeat China. The US cannot militarily defeat Russia. And so this is not a world in which the US holds some kind of magical monopoly. And my view, it's arguable, but my own view as I look at this across many different dimensions is that the gap is much smaller now than it was in 1991 or 1945. And in both those periods, the US had its claim to being the world's superpower or sole superpower. Then it had to face the reality of the Soviet Union during the Cold War, but it was still dominant in many ways. Then in 1991, the US was convinced we really made it. We're the only superpower in the world. Now they say, well, China, we got to somehow kick them down, but they're trying, but we still have an advantage over them. To my mind, this is all anachronism. This is not how the world really is anymore.
Interesting to note that you disagree with Bloomberg, who recently wrote in its detailed article that it's bullets, bits, and bots, implying the military complex, the AI, and the Bitcoin that dominates the world, and US is still at the top of it.
By the way, the idea that Bitcoin somehow empowers the US, to my mind, is exactly showing the fantasy land. How does Bitcoin empower the US? Bitcoin, if anything, challenges the US dollar. And that is an important part of US geopolitical weight.
Yeah, I'm very mindful of your time, but with your permission, if I can end this this amazing discussion, what a privilege it has been to ask you a little bit about your broader vision of economics and economic justice, how resources should be distributed among social groups, what are the methods through which they can be distributed, and so on. You have, of course, spoken about knowledge. One of the things that I was thinking when you were talking is that unlike China, a lot of global South countries face current account deficit problems, which means that it's unable to build productive capacities. In a lot of BRICS nations, for instance, one of the reasons why we say that don't overestimate BRICS is not that we don't want its emergence, but we see that a lot of these countries are current account deficit countries. You talk about de-dollarization is very, very difficult when you balance your current account deficit through short-term capital inflows through the capital market, not even FDI. So you as a leading economist, I'm really curious what your years and years of experience of working with global South countries and also in the global North can inform us about economics and economy.
Very basically, the key to higher living standards, I would say national security, the ability to live long and healthy lives is investment. So the key, this is an idea that goes back a long time, but investment in first people, in health and education as the most fundamental investments of the society. Second, in infrastructure, which today means should mean green energy, 5G, digital, and safe water, sanitation, environmental resilience, and so forth. And third, of course, the development of the business sector alongside that, which is mainly a private sector activity. But investing in people and investing in infrastructure is largely a public activity. And so you need coherent, effective government. You need government that can plan and that can plan ahead on a 20 or 25-year timeline, much beyond the political life of any particular administration, but makes a plan to 2047 or to 2050 or to whatever the date of the particular country should be. In Africa, they talk about 2063, the 100th anniversary of African unity. And core to that idea of rapid development based on high levels and coherent levels of investment are the ability to finance those investments at a large scale. And that requires both domestic public finance, that's the budget, that is sensible over long term, market financing, that's the domestic capital markets, but also the ability to tap international capital flows. And to my mind, this is one of the great shortcomings of the international system. Capital should flow trillions of dollars more per year, in other words, a few percent of GDP more per year, to the low-income and lower-middle-income countries of the world.
That's what the believers of Marshallian economics
exactly. That's my view. Marshall goes back to the 1870s. Here we are 150 years later. I think it's right. Capital should flow to the places that are capital scarce. And they could, and they should. And the BRICS can help to do that, actually. The BRICS should create a set of institutions. The New Development Bank in Shanghai is an example of that, but there are many, many others that can be done. The BRICS are a high-saving region of the world. A lot of the, even poor countries end up financing richer countries because of the depths of the capital market or the perceptions of safety or the ways that the International Monetary Fund or the credit rating agencies work right now. So the global financial architecture, as we call it, is seriously messed up. It misunderstands that the biggest returns in the world are actually in the emerging economies, not in the rich economies. They are absolutely the highest global return in the world, in my view, on a reliable basis, is putting a kid through school. And so the capital market should at least be financing universal quality education for all young people, period, everywhere. And with the device, this can be done. And so if it's not Huawei or Reliance or Google or someone else, my God, we're really failing to take advantage of our absolutely highest investment returns in the world. But all of it is to say, just in conclusion, the global financial system does not work properly right now. And the IMF and the World Bank are barriers to the solution at this point, not part of the solution. And one may say, well, duh, that's been true for a long time. But the real challenge is the IMF is World Bank is at 18th and Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. It's 2 blocks from the White House. The IMF is at 19th in Pennsylvania. Either these are international institutions for all, or they're U.S. institutions to protect U.S. hegemony. And they can't decide, actually. They've been under the thumb of the U.S. for so long. So my point is, we need fundamental global financial reform of the financial system to enable this massive achievement of convergence, which is completely within reach, but it needs financing. And either the BRICS are going to do it in an expanding BRICS, which is half the world, and it's nearly half the world economy with the continued expansion of the BRICS countries, if you count all those that were around the table in Kazan, or we'll do it as a world united, which would be even better if it turns out the United States loses its craziness and starts agreeing to cooperate with the rest of the world. All I can say a little bit pessimistically on that remark is Britain lost its empire, 80 years ago, but it still has imperial nostalgia to an extent that is so perverse and weird. Maybe we shouldn't be so over-optimistic that the United States is going to get it right. But if it doesn't, at least the rest of the world can get it right.
Interesting. You started with investment, remaining very true to the Keynesian idea of looking at the world, but also refreshing that you draw out the priority areas, which Keynes, at least in his general theory, was not very much bothered about. I mean, he was more bothered about how to raise effective demand, because in the post-depression world, but you have outlined the priority areas of education, technology, and so on and so forth. The departing note, what are some of the countries that you think have done really well recently? People talk about post-reforms, China, Scandinavia. What are your what are 1 or 2 countries that you think have done well, relatively speaking?
Well, first of all, I think China over the last 40 years has been exemplary in its economic success. It's hard to imagine doing better than 10% per year rate of return over a 40-year period. It catapulted China to the front ranks of the world system. I'm, as I said, an India optimist. I'm an ASEAN optimist. I'm an Africa optimist going forward. I think the potential is everywhere. Getting organized to understand the potential, avoiding self-destruction through war, those are big challenges. But the economic potential of our time is absolutely enormous.